Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Iron Shib, or Shib for short. I appreciate you being here today. The goal of this video is to dive into one of my favorite builds I've played so far, and that is the Trapper Rogue. I know there's a lot of very strong Rogue builds out there right now, but I'm going to be honest, I think a lot of those builds are going to be pretty hard nerfed on release, and I think this build is super strong, especially in the mobbing aspect, and I don't think it's going to be touched. So check this out, and let's dive right in.
Ready?
Hello, do I fight? It up, okay? It's as simple as that. All right, so let's dive into the skill tree of the Trapper. First, I'm going to start off with Puncture, which is essentially throwing knives. It's going to scale off your melee weapon, and what you're going to try to do with this is ultimately lead it down to the path of getting fundamental puncture. So your throwing knives, if two of those three throwing knives connect, the enemy will be vulnerable, which means the enemy will take 20% more damage. The goal of this is to utilize puncture to try to make it so our enemies take more damage from our traps. But we'll show that off in a second. Moving down, you're going to go into Flurry. Flurry is our right-click skill that's going to be another source of damage while our traps are on cooldown. You're pretty much going to spam Flurry anytime you possibly can. It'll also spread vulnerable across to other enemies. And so ultimately you get one person set with vulnerable with puncture, and then you go in with Flurry and you try to get vulnerable on everyone while your traps are setting off. Now we're going to move down the key a little bit. In first, we're going to find Dash. Dash is essentially our movement skill. We're going to constantly keep Dash at 1 because all we really need to do with Dash is just use it for mobility and getting around the map. We don't really need to do too much else with it. We're going to move down the tree and head towards our actual traps. So first things first, Poison Trap. This is a very strong source of damage. As you can see at level 2, I have it hitting for 14 damage already over 9 seconds. So I want to typically try to fight as many of my bosses and enemies on Poison Traps as possible. And then before a boss fight, try to lay out as many poison traps as you can around the map because you can hold up to 4 on the map at the same time. One of the very strong things on Poison Trap is the first enhancement, and that is Enhanced Poison Trap. Poison Trap knocks down enemies for 1.5 seconds when it activates. So it's a tripping mechanic. Very strong because enemies will be vulnerable. They'll be tripped and laying on the ground while they're just soaking poison damage and getting hurt by other traps. So enhancing this more, you deal 10% increased poison damage to enemies standing inside of your poison trap. Outside of that, Smoke Grenade. Smoke Grenade is our only daze skill. This does not do damage, but instead will throw a grenade pretty far distance, and if it connects with enemies in a pretty large area, it will daze them, meaning they can't attack. All they can do is walk around. So all they're going to do is just walk in locations. Really good for keeping them near traps without having them fight you while you're dancing on top of your traps. So enemies that are affected by Smoke Grenade will take 15% increased damage from us. And then dealing direct damage to enemies by Smoke Grenade has a 25% chance to reduce its cooldowns. If the enemy is vulnerable, it decreases it by 2 seconds. And as we're going to have vulnerable around the map pretty much at all times, this synergizes pretty well. You're going to buff up Exploit, which means you deal 18% increased damage to healthy and injured enemies, which is really good for traps. And then you're going to deal 3% increase to vulnerable enemies. I just buffed these passives because it kind of works with our synergy. And now we're going to get into the real meat and potatoes of the build, and that is Death Trap. Death Trap right here is our main source of damage. It is a large shadow damaging ultimate that does 952 damage. It's on a pretty large cooldown, but you're going to spec into the fact that all enemies get pulled into the center of Death Trap. Prime Death Trap is going to pull everyone into the center. They're going to go onto your Poison Trap. Your Poison Trap is going to trip all of them, so they're taking poison and shadow damage from your traps. And then ultimately, if Death Trap kills an enemy, it'll reduce its cooldown by 10 seconds. So the combo, as you've seen in a lot of these videos I'm clipping here, you're going to see me using shadow and poison together and then just flurrying them while they're laying on the ground, just soaking trap damage. So let's talk about the Capstone, which really pulls this build together. Capstone is essentially like your subclass in Diablo. Once you get down to these final trees, clicking one of these is going to change the way you play the game almost completely. The reason Trapper is inherently a thing you can choose is right here due to exposure. Dealing direct damage to an enemy affected by a trap skill has up to 25% chance to reduce the active cooldowns of all of your trap skills by 20%. Every time, and drop a cluster of stun grenades that deal 145 damage and stun an enemy for half a second. That's insanely strong. So as you're using these trap skills and damaging people that are being affected by them, your trap skill cooldowns are going to keep shooting down, so you can just constantly spam these traps, keep the enemies trapped up, keep the mobs at bay, and deal damage to bosses. And while this is happening, and another positive note is you might say, well, you only have 2 traps on this build. How's that going to work? All of your stun grenades and all of your grenades you drop and your daze grenade, your smoke bomb grenade, are going to count as traps due to the legendaries you will find. I found multiple legendaries, which you'll see in the next segment, that say all grenade skills, so including this daze smoke grenade and the stun grenade you're going to be dropping with all of these abilities, do count as traps. So all of those will effectively reduce cooldowns for your other traps, making it so you can have your poison trap and your death trap constantly rolling. We can talk specialization. Right now I'm running inner sight because in the beta you can't do preparation. Inner sight ultimately makes it so an enemy will have a purple symbol over them. As you deal damage to them, it'll fill up a bar, and it makes it so you have unlimited essence, which is unlimited mana. Pretty strong, but for this build we're really going to want to work towards preparation. We're not 100% sure what preparation is going to be yet, but if you look at World of Warcraft, preparation is an ultimate reduction cooldown system. So imagine how strong that will be with our cooldown reduction across the board of our capstone. The fact that every time we kill an enemy death trap, it drops the cooldown by 10 seconds, and whatever preparation is going to do to reduce the cooldown as well. So ultimately we're going to be able to throw death trap and poison trap consistently on the ground. It's going to be super strong. I can't wait to see this on full release. I think this build is going to be a sleeper. Stay on me with this one. So let's talk about some of the legendaries that synergize with this build and make it go over the top. And this is all the legendaries I've only seen so far in the beta. There's likely to be plenty more that'll synergize with the build as well. But let's just talk about what I've gained so far. First things first, these boots. They're called the explosive verve boots. But ultimately what these boots do is it makes it so your grenade skills count as trap skills. And whenever you armor trap or drop grenades, you gain 15% increased movement speed for the rogue. Very strong, and it's very synergistic. So your smoke bomb will now become a trap. Every time you drop stun grenades, it'll be a trap, and that's going to synergize like crazy with the build, as you could already tell based on what I've been talking about before. So next we're going to talk about the uncanny treachery armor, and that's going to give us the perk of when you deal damage to a dazed enemy with an agility skill, you will go invisible. Since we're not going to have any invisible skills rocking on our build, this is going to be really strong, giving us some escapability and also leading into us being able to drop stun grenades, and we'll talk about why that is in a second. For example, on my ring here, when you break stealth with an attack, you drop a cluster of exploding stun grenades around your location that deal 341 physical damage and stun enemies for 0.5 seconds. So now when I come back out of that stealth that I've gained from my first invisibility, I'll be able to drop those stun grenades, which will count as traps and lead into the perk of me being able to reduce the cooldowns of all of my traps across the board as I'm just naturally fighting with this build. So that's going to do it for today's Trapper build. I had so much fun with this build in the beta. I can't wait to see what it's actually capable of once we get to those capstones and see what preparation can do. If you like this kind of content, hit that subscribe button, come over to Twitch, hit follow, join our fam, because we will be having a clan on Diablo for release. I'll catch you guys live during the beta. Thank you so much for being here, and I love you guys.